All right, let's talk about objective morality. Now, objective morality, or just objectivity in general, is something that I don't think gets talked about enough in mental health. In fact, in general, I don't think there's enough philosophy or philosophical discussions. Because when we're talking about mental health, at the end of the day, we're talking about the realities and the intricacies of a human person. And not all the answers of a human person can be answered specifically from a material or scientific standpoint, especially when it comes to things like psychiatry, right? We are not just neurochemicals. We are much more complicated than that. Objective morality, by the nature of what we are doing, it is a part of mental health. And I think a theme that's kind of been present and to some extent has a place in the history of mental health is one really of subjectivity. What is the experience of the patient or the client? What is the person reporting? What is their relationship with that thing? How do they interpret that? And all of those things, they serve their purpose, but there's an end point to that. There's a point where we have to start making some objective claims. And here's the thing: is we make objective claims in mental health. Probably the biggest one is the claim that people inherently should not end their own life. That is an objective moral claim. And we take it very seriously. If people are expressing thoughts of ending their life, we can take legal action, right? Now it has to be like more imminent than simply expressing it, of course. But depending on the severity, there's pathways for that. That's a pretty serious thing. So subjectivity has an endpoint. There's points where that no longer is part of the equation. And yet in mental health, there's lots of different areas where we're pushing the line and we're allowing patients to make claims that does not align with reality. And this happens, we put up objectivity and objective barriers with patients all the time. Patients that have body dysmorphia, we're moving them to a more objective standpoint, right? It's no longer subjective, it's objective. Patients who have, the nature of disorder inherently dictates that there is proper order, that there is a standard of order, that there is a way that things should kind of be function in our lives, and there's a hierarchy, which I would also argue points to design, but that's a larger question. So it's interesting in mental health, where do those lines get pushed? Where do the boundaries get drawn when it comes to objectivity and subjectivity? And there really isn't a basis for us to kind of come back to. They're kind of societal norms that kind of wax and wane, and there needs to be a standard. There needs to be certain claims that we hold to, because we have to, of course, respect the autonomy and, to the extent that is reasonable, the subjectivity of patients. But the objectivity has to have a place. And in fact, the basic tenets of mental health stand on the shoulders of objectivity, right? There's the idea that people have inherent worth and they deserve to have less suffering in their life. That's an objective moral claim, right? And what do we base that off of, right? We have to have something to base that off of. There are conversations that need to be had more, and there are conversations that need to be incorporated in the way that we treat patients. And again, I think especially in psychiatry. In psychiatry, we tend to just see things from a very material lens. That's not everybody by any means. There's lots of great people out there. But we also have to make decisions about medications from that standpoint. Something that's really important to me is just taking into the reality of the whole human person, of mind, body, and spirit. And they all have a place at the table, and they all have an impact. So, yes, objectivity. those are questions we need to kind of grapple with. Where do we draw the boundaries in mental health? What are the objective moral claims we're making, and how do we set the standard for that? For me, I'm coming at all of this with a Christian worldview, but I try to be conscientious and understand that not everybody does. But you can't get past the reality that we are taking patients to a objective framework. That's where we're leading them to. That's the whole, one of the tenets of cognitive behavioral therapy is that there's an understanding that they have that is false. So that means that there is something that's true, and we have to help them find what's true. But how do we help them find what's true if, as a society or as a people, we don't even have an agreement on what is true, or that there's people that don't even believe that objective truth is real? And as institutions, we have to be able to make those claims that say, no, there is such thing as objective truth, and this is what is true. We can't be in this wishy-washy place anymore. Objectivity, not pretending like objectivity is not real. How can we help people lead a better life if we're just helping them set their own standards? Obviously, people are not good at that, right? One of the things that kind of prompted this conversation was this podcast I was listening to. It was a Catholic podcast, and it was two individuals talking about sexual morality. There was one gentleman who's a Catholic apologist, obviously coming from a Christian worldview. The other gentleman is now an atheist, coming from more of a subjective, I guess, atheistic, maybe, I don't know if you'd say materialist, but generally that standpoint. And the gentleman who was kind of arguing from the atheistic standpoint, which again, he raised some reasonable points, but one of the backdrops that he kept coming back to was mental health. What are we seeing in terms of rates of mental health? If we're this type of behavior if we're going to say that this is okay or not okay, what types of things are in the data are we seeing that talks about the mental health? Well, here's the biggest problem with that is that people are notoriously bad at assessing their mental state. I'm culprit number one right here. I don't even know how many times I've gone through periods where I'd say I'm doing good. Things are going well in my life. And then only to later on look back and be like, wow, things were not aligned. Things were not I was not operating out of my value systems. I was not, doing things in a certain way. I can say that happens to me all the time. And I can tell you that I have patients that are deeply ingrained in a certain addictive, maladaptive behaviors that they have no conscious awareness of. And it's not necessarily to their detriment. There's so many reasons that could contribute to that. I'm sorry, it is to their detriment. It's not necessarily something they're consciously doing. So they're doing, they're aware that they're doing it because they want to do that. It's for so many different reasons and operating out of their own brokenness, but they're not a great assessor of that at the end of the day. So that just, and I know when we're talking about statistics, we're talking about generally sweeping and looking at measurable data and large sample sizes, and that's all fair. I just don't think that, and these questionnaires are generally subjective, right? We're looking at mostly subjective information. People reported symptoms. And I can just tell you from personal experience and professional experience that patients are not great at understanding that. So to wrap this all up, objective morality has to have a place in mental health. As in these institutions, they have to have a place where they can make objective claims, and it can't be wishy-washy, because as we've seen in other countries, in terms of a person's ability to end their own life, those things can change. Those boundaries can get moved. There's got to be something there. So anyways, if you are interested in the things that I'm saying or want to hear more about these types of conversations, please like and subscribe. Continue to talk about some of these mental health topics. Also, if you live in the state of Idaho, please check me out, sparrowmentalhealth.com, specializing in ADHD, depression, and anxiety, but I have experience treating wide arrays of mental health. Thanks.